Resolution 19, which is the shareholder resolution, and we'd like to give Mr. Van Baal an opportunity to speak and present his resolution.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. van Beurden, directors, fellow shareholders, good to see you again. Today is an important day, not only just for Shell, not even for the entire oil industry, but for the world at large. Today, investors will decide and will show if they mean business about climate change. 3 years ago, we stood here at the AGM on behalf of a few hundred shareholders. Our conviction was that Shell, arguably the most innovative company in the oil industry, would take leadership in the energy transition. We believed that you only needed shareholder support to do so. We saw a benefit for the company and an imperative for its shareholders. To quote Aegon, one of the biggest investors voting for the climate resolution today, Shell has enough skilled personnel and innovative power to achieve this goal. Thanks to the investors who supported our resolution in 2017, and let me name a few, Achmea, Actiam, MN, Van Lanschot Kempen, Shell has changed course. In November, the company made an industry-leading announcement in response to the shareholder support for the climate resolution. We applauded your net carbon footprint ambition. With that, you accept responsibility for the emissions of your customers, the so-called Scope 3 emissions, also until recently intensely debated. We hope that all the investors who vote against the resolution last year, because they assumed Scope 3 was simply outside Shell's responsibility, for example Robeco and APG, will now vote for this year's resolution. By accepting responsibility for Scope 3 emissions, Shell has shown a measure of realism in understanding the problem we all face. And again, we applaud you for that. But the anonymous rejection of this climate resolution by the board demonstrates a lack of realism in what we need to address this issue seriously. Fellow shareholders, Shell still needs more support to take meaningful action. The resolution asks for no more and no less than a commitment to achieving the goal of Paris. Shell's current ambitions, 20% reduction in emission by 2035, relative, 50% by 2050, again relative, effectively allow the company to continue business as usual for a while. Apparently, not one single director of the perhaps soon-to-be biggest oil company in the world can imagine a future without oil and gas within this century. We think that the board of a powerful company needs more diversity. We think the board of such a powerful company needs at least one director who differs from opinion about the imagination beyond oil and gas, sense of urgency, commitment to Paris, and leadership in the energy transition. Luckily, this is not what the world's investors want. Shell's ambition is to follow society. The climate resolution asks for more, for leadership. Investors, publicly and in media, are asking the oil industry to come clean, to make concrete commitments. I quote literally, concrete commitments to the Paris goals. Last Friday, 60 of the biggest global asset managers, many of them present today, published an open letter in the Financial Times. They called on all companies to explain how the investment they make today, in the case of Shell, 25 billion a year, are compatible and consistent with a pathway towards the Paris goal. Shell makes two main arguments against the resolution in the Dutch business newspaper Financiële Dagblad last Friday. Its first argument is that Shell's net carbon footprint ambition is more progressive than what the resolution asks for. This is not true, Mr. Chairman. Fellow shareholders, this is not true. All we ask simply is for Shell to align its targets with the Paris goal, to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees C. Shell's latest ambition is not aligned with a well below 2 degrees C scenario. So since the first argument is not true, Shell is not more progressive than what the resolution asks for, We live with the second. Shell's director asked, and I quote the directors, for flexibility to thrive in whatever world society moves towards. Actually, shareholders, Shell is asking investors to back a follower, not a leader. Let's be honest, with the words, whatever world, directors ask us to consider a scenario in which the goal of the Paris Climate Agreement will not be met. A scenario of catastrophic climate change. More and more investors find this morally and financially unacceptable. Let me quote. Aegon says, we consider it very important that the goals of the Paris are actually achieved in the interests of both the society and of our clients. It is important that the investment that we make with their pension money are free of climate risks. AGM says, we support this resolution because Shell has not yet set out any specific goals to make the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy as short as possible. And finally, the Church of England. The position we take in supporting the follow this resolution is based on our belief that we need targets across the whole oil and gas sector and not just at Shell. Shareholders board, whatever happens today, investors are sending a clear signal to Shell and to all oil and gas companies that their owners will not accept an ambition just to halve, in relative terms, the carbon footprint by 2050. We've heard Matt Crossman from the IIGCC, for example. 8 trillion worth of asset owners want targets. Beyond any room for doubt, the world's most important investors have asked for concrete commitments on a pathway to the Paris goal. Mr. Chairman, Mr. van Beurden, directors and shareholders. Today, investors will show if they prefer Shell's flexible whatever world society moves towards, or a world that takes action to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. A world where all companies set meaningful climate targets, especially oil majors. Because oil majors, they have the resources and the brainpower to make or break the Paris Agreement. I would like to end with what we said in 2015, in 2016, and 2017. You have our support.
Thank you, Mr. Van Baal. Let's start with a response from our Chief Executive Officer, then we'll take comments and questions from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Van Baal, for coming. As you heard me say earlier before, your board unanimously recommends against the vote today. We clearly support the Paris Agreement. We have ambitions that are completely consistent and compatible with the Paris Agreement. We hear that Follow This wants us to take leadership. Your company is taking leadership. So my response, Mr. Van Baal and shareholders, is follow us.
Allow me one response to that. If you say to your shareholders that a 50% footprint reduction by 2050 is aligned with any well below 2 degrees pathway, a 50% relative energy demand will grow. If you say that's well below a 2 degree pathway, you're misleading your shareholders.
I cannot let this go. I'm not misleading shareholders. I recommend to all our shareholders to take note of the publications that I mentioned earlier on. One of the publications is our Sky scenario that points out how the world could get to a less than 2 degrees C outcome. This work, which is based on very extensive modeling how we see the energy system evolve towards net zero emissions by 2070, has been reviewed peer-reviewed, has been commented upon by MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who have, with their climate modeling, determined that this world, this sky scenario, would result in a 1.75 degrees C outcome. What we have done is we have picked a midpoint at 2050, where we believe the world needs to have an energy system at 40 grams of CO2 per megajoule energy consumed, and we have said our portfolio will meet that point of 40 grams of CO2 per megajoule energy consumed. At the moment, we are at 82. So we will more than halve the carbon footprint of our energy products, which, by the way, is more ambitious than what the rest of society has to do. So I take issue with the point that I'm misleading. I would recommend that you read what we publish.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Mr. Van Baal,
I want to just emphasize to the shareholders, the net carbon footprint ambition does not fit the sky scenario. The sky scenario is verified by MIT, but the net carbon footprint ambition does not fit the sky scenario. And I want shareholders to take notice of that. Thank you.
Microphone.